Hello and welcome to the programme. Coming up for you this week on Motor Week. For me, it's hot stuff when I get to grips with the pocket rocket that is the Renault Sport Clio 172. Whereas for Brendan Coogan, well, it's rather muckier stuff in the tiny, tiny mud-plugging Mitsubishi Pinin, which is a teeny relative of the much larger and more sturdy Mitsubishi Shogun. But first then, news of my blossoming love affair with the 172. And please, God, look after Auntie Floss and the budgie. Oh, and please, make me 17 again, with the keys to one of these in my pocket. It's the Clio Sport 172 2-litre 16 valve, and it's very much the kind of thing that leaves teenage boys with some embarrassing explaining to do when it comes to sheet washing time. The 172 in the title refers to the brake horsepower, all 172 of them, which means in hot hatch terms, this thing is at furnace temperature. There is in fact only one hot hatch, and as that's the Renault Sport Clio V6, I don't think they're too worried. It's not just the exterior that's been funked up, the interior's been given the treatment too. It looks great, very sporty, but with some luxury touches, as well as the chrome bits. We've got lots of Alcantara, that's pretend suede, and blue leather on the wheel and places like that. In fact, you get more or less the same interior in the V6, but whereas after the unbelievable comic book exterior of that car, it's a bit of a disappointing anticlimax, here in the slightly more subdued version, it's fantastic. Wouldn't it have been wonderful, though, to have struck up an intimate relationship with one of these in your teenage years? Well, looks like this, along with so many of today's little pleasures, will have to be reserved for the wedged-up 30-somethings who haven't yet started out on their own path towards creating the next generation of hot hatch hooligan teenagers. Time for a quick flick through the spec cards then, as we sit in the Frog and Wicket consuming an underage pint of watery lager shandy. We've got 172 bhp. Nice. 0 to 60, 7 seconds, mate. Top speed, 138 miles an hour. Ooh, yeah. Variable valve engine and all, mate. Whatever that is. Get the crisps in, eh? If there's just one thing Renault Sport really can do, it's sort the suspension on a sporty little car. It feels, for my money, perfect. Just crashing and jarring enough so you're in something that really is about driving fast and hard, but not so much that all your teeth fall out. That engine is beating out more than enough power. If anything, there's too much grip. There are times when I'd like it to perhaps break away and give me a little bit more feel about what it's doing. The steering, nice and direct, even the driving position, though the same as an ordinary Clio. Perhaps something to do with the more padded seat and this little leathery steering wheel feels just right. I actually feel almost as if I'm in a rally car suited for tarmac use. Very, very hot. Claim to be, with only one exception, the ultimate hot hatch. And that's the weird thing, it just seems strange to introduce the hottest of hot hatches and then upstage it yourself. But I suppose whereas the V6 with barely enough space on board for a credit card is hardly practical, the 172, well, pretty much is. And at about 15,995 quid, it's about 10 grand cheaper than the V6. It still is a shame though about all those poor 17-year-olds unable to insure such a car. I guess I'm far better off after all, being 21. What? Yeah, all right, 24, 20, 25-ish.
The off-road car market has, like life itself, always been full of compromises. At first, cars were very capable off-road, but basic and uncomfortable. Then they became big and flash and far too expensive to ever take off-road. And more recently, we've seen the hip on-road off-roader, small and funky 4x4s, driven by people who don't necessarily want to go off-road, but they want to look as if they could. And so Mitsubishi launched its Pinin, a hip, small off-roader, which is cheaper than its Shogun, to battle with the likes of the Suzuki Grand Vitara and Toyota's new RAV4. Both Toyota and Suzuki offer long wheelbase versions of their pint-sized off-roaders, and Mitsubishi have followed suit with the Pinin. This 5-door model will be available from the beginning of January. Japanese design doesn't always translate well in Europe, and so Mitsubishi went to Italian-style house Pininfarina to design and build its new small 4x4. After all, what's good enough for Ferrari? Look. Woo! Pininfarina. Yes, this car has been designed by Italy's most famous design house, by the YTS lads, on their lunch break. Alright, so I'm being a bit harsh, but what you have here is a sized down Shogun. I'm sure Mitsubishi must feel a little ripped off when they see such other great designs from the Italians, such as the Fiat Coupe and the Peugeot 406 Coupe. Now Mitsubishi are keen to stress that this car isn't all mouth and no trousers, and that it really can perform off-road. Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's get muddy. I have to say that the car performs reasonably well with some ground clearance and a 4-wheel drive system that offers both 2-wheel drive for on-road performance, 4-wheel drive high for extra safety on-road in slippery conditions, and low ratio for when it gets really tough. And if you need extra ability, the top elegance models give you a limited slip differential as standard, with it as an option on the equipped models. Now in 4-wheel drive, low ratio with the differentials locked, this car's performing quite well off-road. However, I would like to see it tested a bit more. This course is all about mud and sliding around. There's no real extreme all-terrain. Now, I've said it before and we'll say it again, most of these cars won't spend their time up to their wheel arches in mud. To them, off-roading is probably going to be a high curb in the supermarket. So, all of these cars have got to be able to cut it on-road as well. Either a 1.8 litre or 2 litre version of Mitsubishi's GDI direct injection petrol engine powers the Pinin. The 2 litre unit in this car produces 127 brake horsepower, enough to propel the car from 0 to 60 in just over 10 seconds, and with a top whack of 108 miles per hour. As 4x4s go, I quite like the drive in this car. The suspension's quite firm and you can feel a lot of the bumps, but I like that. I don't want some American spongy car. In terms of mid-range torque, there's ample, which is good for an off-roader. All in all, it does exactly what it says on the tin. In addition to the ride, I quite like the comfort levels in the car. The seats are really firm and the elevated driving position gives you a commanding view. Now Mitsubishi keep going on about how efficient this new GDI engine is. Well, for efficiency, read low CO2 emissions. Don't expect high MPG figures. We've been driving this car now all day and we still haven't got much above 20 miles per gallon. Not great for a car in its class. It's a shame that Pininfarina didn't take a look at the inside as well as the outside of this car, because as we so often say, the interior dash is just an array of greys and plastics. But Mitsubishi have got a little bit of silver there, fancy. No, but seriously, I do like the layout of the car. The dashes are good, plain and simple, easy to read. And this display at the top, on the top of the dash, is very informative and clear. And I do like this stereo. Push the button and it displays the cassette player. It all works well and it's well put together. The build quality is very good, but what would you expect from Mitsubishi? Now this new 5-door Pinin has had an extra 6.5 inches added to its wheelbase, which means that you can get 5 adults in here really comfortably. It's got really big doors as well. All right, so I've been poking fun at this car, but I actually really like the Pinin. The off-road market is all about compromises. For off-road capability, you have to sacrifice on-road and vice versa. Well, do you? The Mitsubishi Pinin performs reasonably well at most things, and let's face it, the people who are going to buy this car won't necessarily want to go off-road, they just want to look as if they can. So if you're looking for a car in this class, you could do a lot worse than the Pinin.
The Fiat Multipla. When it was born, I should imagine it was a case of Fiat saying, well, let's hope she's clever, because she sure ain't never going to be pretty. But despite these looks, it's actually selling very well. And if you need to seat 6 people and you've got 15 grand and a good sense of humour, you could do an awful lot worse. Keep it with us, because after the break, Chris Goffey puts the new Peugeot Coupe Cabriolet through its paces. We'll see you then.
Now, I have to say, I'm a sucker for a soft top. Wind in your hair, blue bottles in your teeth, that's for me. But there's always a downside. Now, I'm a veteran of British sports cars for more years than I care to remember. And first, there's the hood. First, you've got to find the hood sticks. You've got to stick them together. You've got to get them in the right slot. Then there's this great flapping array of canvas with the lift the dot fasteners and the Zutz turn keys that rip your thumbnail off at a stroke. But nowadays, of course, things are pretty different. Because this is the Peugeot 206 Coupe Cabriolet, and with the tip of a pinky on a switch, the hydraulics and electrics swing into action and the hardtop folds away. Couldn't be easier, really, could it? One day. It's amazing how the image of Peugeot has changed over the years. They used to be manufacturers of worthy, durable but dull cars for the French middle class. And they were going down the slippery slope towards oblivion and bankruptcy, and then along came the 205, and that changed everything. It was youthful, it was fast, it was light, it was cheerful, and in GTI mode it was the ultimate hooligan's roller skate. And the 205 almost single-handedly changed the whole image of Peugeot. Well, now this, the 206 Coupe, is the latest example of their appeal to young people. And it's not quite as tightly strapped down as the 206 GTI, so the ride's a bit softer. However, it's still got that 206 skateboard feel, pin-sharp steering, instant response from the wheel, and tremendous grip. Brakes are good too. That gets ABS as standard with EBFD, an electronic system that gives you maximum brake performance in an emergency. With the roof up like this, it feels like a conventional saloon, though there is an annoying wind rustle round the back of the hardtop. The trouble with taking the top off a monocoque car like this is that you inevitably reduce the rigidity of the body shell. And this car does have some scuttle shake and vibration at the top of the windscreen when the top is down. It's not bad though, and certainly not as bad as the 306 Cabriolet, for example. We've changed cars, and this one is fitted with the red interior. Red leather really looks good, and I think is an ideal colour combination. Peugeot described the car as a coupe cabriolet, and in coupe form like this. There are a couple of occasional seats in the back, but you wouldn't want adults to sit in them for too long. And with the top off and folded back into the boot, you effectively lose half your luggage space. So if you're into long distance touring with the top down, then You certainly don't want 2 kids in the back, because you're going to need all that space for your bags. Peugeot first showed this as a concept car in Geneva 2 years ago. The press liked it and so did the public, so they decided to build it. And they've done very well in engineering terms to get it to market this quickly. The lines are pretty similar to 206, except the windscreen comes further back with much more of a sweep, and the bulkhead at the top here is actually quite close to your forehead, and the screen pillars are very thick indeed. Colours are interesting, and Peugeot provides you with their recommendations for the internal trim. You notice you can have green, grey, black, blue, but if you choose the red one, then you can only have grey and black coloured seats. If I had a red one, I'd want red seats, for goodness sake. At the end of the day, you've got to decide whether you want a coupe like this or a more traditional Mazda MX-5 or MGF. Personally, I'd take the Mazda MX-5, but then I'm a boring old sports car traditionalist.
In 1997, when Daewoo launched their executive car, the Leganza, they boldly claimed that it could compete with the likes of Vauxhall's Amiga in the executive car sector. In reality, to be honest, that was utter hogwash. Prestige and a recognised badge are what that sector are all about, and this Leganza had none of those. It was, however, a cheap car, and 3 or 4 years later, a used model like this is now incredibly cheap. For instance, we found this 3-year-old 2-litre SX Leganza with only 10,000 miles on the clock for £5,400. I can't believe what a cheap motor this is. When it was new, it cost £14,500, and it's got all the toys on it as well. ABS brakes, air conditioning, electric windows, a sunroof, and the list goes on. You wonder how they can offer such good value. So what do you need to look out for on the Leganza? Well, very little seems to go wrong. Build quality is acceptable. Check all round for any dents or scrapes. The car does have a rather tinny feel to it. It is a big car, not quite as long or wide as an Amiga, but bigger than a Mondeo, say. And that means decent room all round for passengers and a pretty good boot too. In the Leganza range, there are only 2 models to choose from, this 2-litre SX and the 2-litre CDX, which gained alloy wheels, climate control and leather. This 2-litre unit is hardly the most powerful in the world, with only 136 brake horsepower on tap, and it sounds rather harsh when revved hard. The ride is comfortable, and it's a very relaxed and easy car to drive on a run. So when this car was new, it cost £14,500, and in 3 years it's lost 60% of its original value. One thing that Daewoo are not very good at is holding on to residuals. It's also just out of its standard 3-year 60,000 mile warranty too, but I wouldn't worry too much on the mechanical side about things going wrong, because one thing that car makers from the Far East are very good at is reliability. And I don't expect that you'll find a car like this in as good a condition with as low a mileage as cheap as this. So, the Daewoo Leganza may not be the ultimate driver's car, in fact far from it, but if value for money motoring rather than a certain image of what you're after, well, this Leganza could be absolutely ideal. It may not be everyone's cup of tea, but for £5,500 or even less, can you really go wrong?
It's not always the case that you want supermodel good looks in cars, buildings or whatever. Sometimes when form follows function, the results can have a kind of beauty of their own just because they work. But then sometimes practicality doesn't always result in beauty. Sometimes it's a bit of an ugly duckling. The Citroen Berlingo Multispace. It sure ain't pretty, is it? It's actually a car based on a van that was built to have car-like qualities, if you see what I mean. But don't let the word van frighten you, there are some nice touches in here. The nicest of which is this, a full-length canvas sunroof. Practically open-top motoring. It will cost you. As an extra, it's about 450 quid, though on this one, it was actually included in the price. So you might be able to negotiate it at your local Citroen dealer. And that brings us on to the car's biggest feature, or in a way its smallest feature, the price. 9,495 quid, which I reckon makes it amazing value. Okay, for that money, what could you get as a mini hatch? Possibly a VW Polo 1.4, which is going to look better and drive better, but if you need space, it would have to be this. Unless you've got another 4 grand, then you could get a mini MPV and have both. You see, it's like this. You don't always want to be wearing your nice, best, fancy leather jacket. Might look good, but it's not going to be any good if it's raining and cold and wet. What you want then is a nice big comfy anorak, which may not look as good, but put it this way. If you're halfway up a mountain and it's freezing cold, this is going to be beautiful. And this is the automotive equivalent of a big comfy anorak. Believe me, loaded with useful features such as sliding doors. Try that in a supermarket car park. Great access, you don't bash the car next to you. Useful. You see, oh, let me lose this thing. You can have your little sports cars and hatches, and that's great, but when do you find in those this kind of space? You could fit a hatchback in here. And it doesn't stop there either, because it's not just the width and the depth, it's the height. You can get all your possessions in. It increases. You see, it's not difficult to give yourself a colossal amount of space. We're talking back to a van. Huge! You see, this is where its van origins really start to pay off. Ask any van driver and you'll be told what you need is a flat load space and a high roof, and you've got both. That's it for this week. Rather cheap, nasty Santa Claus hats will be de rigueur next week for our Christmas special, and we'll be taking a look back at some of the highlights from the last year. See you then.